Afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever you are. My name is Marie Dennis. I am the Senior Director of the Catholic Nonviolence Initiative. Pax Christi International is one of Pax Christi International's very special programs, and I'm very happy to be with you this afternoon, this evening. We are especially honored to have with us today Bishop Mark Seitz, the 6th Bishop of El Paso, Texas, and Chairman of the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops Committee on Migration. In light of the challenging circumstances faced by so many vulnerable individuals at the U.S. Mexico border, Bishop Seitz emphasizes the Church's place as witness and guarantor of the obligation to uphold human dignity. As bishop of a borderland community whose sister city is Ciudad Juarez, Bishop Seitz has focused his work and heart on impoverished and vulnerable people, including migrant families and refugees who have made their home in El Paso or who choose El Paso as their point of passage. The bishop believes that migrants add inestimable value to the communities where they choose to live, and that parishes and community members should welcome them with compassion, love, and solidarity. In 2017, Bishop Seitz issued a pastoral letter on immigration, in which he said that elected leaders have not yet mustered the moral courage to enact permanent, comprehensive immigration reform. He praised the many who spend themselves in service to migrants and refugees and who campaign against the militarization of the border. He expressed concern for immigrant families who fear separation and for law enforcement officers who put their lives on the line to stem the flow of weapons and drugs, but are troubled in conscience by divisive political rhetoric and new edicts coming from Washington, D.C. He condemned profit-based immigration detention centers, the hostility shown to asylum seekers, and the disparagement of our Muslim brothers and sisters. 2 months ago in August, giving witness to his own deep pastoral commitment to migrants, Bishop Seitz visited the Darian Gap on the border between Colombia and Panama, the most difficult part of the journey north for many migrants. There, he said, you could see the suffering in their faces. Bishop Seitz was born in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, the eldest of 10 children. He was ordained a priest in the Diocese of Dallas in 1980. Again, thank you so much for being with us today, Bishop Seitz. Welcome.
It's really a pleasure to be with you and all of you who are taking your time out of this day, as you said, whether morning or night, to join us.
Well, we're very glad that you're here. And I thought perhaps you could start by sharing with us a bit about your visit to the Darian Gap that was so recent and I'm sure very impactful.
Certainly. I was able to take part in a meeting that brought together bishops, priests, sisters, laity, in many involved in have given their life really to this work of aiding immigrants in their journey. A meeting that brought them together in Panama. We were well represented, of course, in Central America, but we also had representatives from South America and even from Canada at this meeting. And a small group of us were invited to accompany a member of the Dicastery for Integral Human Development who also took part, Cardinal Czerny, to take a trip sponsored by the Panamanian government to the northern part of the Darian Gap. They flew us down there, and we were able to spend part of the day to familiarize ourselves with that reality. We flew into an airport a little bit north of the jungle but still part of that region. And then we got in vehicles and traveled farther south, and then off the main road. We drove several miles on a very rough road and came to a place where there was a little bit of you could see a temporary development. And that led down a little further to the edge of the river, where people were being ferried on long, narrow boats with engines on the end. They were kind of homemade boats. And they were used to take people from for the last stage of their journey through the jungle. We had the opportunity to witness there people who were arriving at the shore of the river, people who could barely walk because they had traversed that 70-mile stretch, very often in poor sandals, through mud and rivers and the like, with feet that were wet and that worn down through the trek, carrying young children, babies that were somewhat listless, and happy to have arrived at this point, and yet had so much farther to go. I wanted, in the worst way, to say to them, "You've arrived. You're okay. You're here." But I couldn't really say that because I knew that they still had a couple of thousand miles to go. And actually, some of the immigrants say when they arrive at our border in El Paso, Texas, the worst part wasn't the Darian Gap. It was the traverse through Mexico and the many dangers they faced there. So it was kind of heartbreaking to see them at that point and knowing that they had so much longer to go in their journey.
Well, thank you for being there, Bishop Seitz. Thank you for representing all of us who, in many ways, don't know how to help, but desire to at least express solidarity with those who are traveling such long, hard distances. I did forget to say when we started that there is an opportunity to ask questions. Just click on the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, and the chat is open. So if you have comments, feel free to add them there. Perhaps, Bishop Seitz, could you tell us, in your ongoing pastoral attention to the immigrants arriving in El Paso, what have you found to be their kind of general profile? For example, what were their motives for leaving their countries of origin, and how are they doing now after such a difficult journey all the way to the border and across the border? And what are their hopes for a new life in the United States? Just in general, could you give us a bit of a picture of those who have come to El Paso or through El Paso?
Some people, having watched media reports as their main source of information, might be surprised to know that I have not yet met a single axe murderer. I'm sorry to make light of such thing, but I hope it brings home the point that the people I've met, far and away, are people who are striving to find a safe refuge for themselves and their families, moms and dads and children, sometimes women who are expecting babies, people who show tremendous love for their children, and the very fact that their children are alive is a sign of the tremendous courage that the parents have had to care for their kids along the way. I find people who are so much like ourselves, with the same desires, the same values, the same goals. And one thing is different than most of us, I think, in the United States, is that there are also people of tremendous faith, tremendous, beautiful faith, and they will quickly tell you about the way that God intervened in their life, in their perilous journey. They will tell you about miracles that, frankly, are hard to explain any other way, because of the way that they, by any human measure, were at the end of the line with little reasonable reason for hope, and yet in the moment of greatest need, they received what they most needed. They're inspiring to me, the people I met. In our own particular shelter, our Catholic diocese had 5 of them operating through most of the pandemic. At one point, we had more than that. But one of those is at our Diocesan Pastoral Center, the place where the diocesan offices are. We converted a building that we use for large gatherings and day retreats, things like that, into a shelter. And so I have the opportunity on a regular basis to encounter these people. Thousands of people passed through our shelter, which could take in between 30 to 70 on a night. And we never had a problem with their behavior. They were ready to step up and volunteer and help, and express their gratitude to us, to pray with us. Those were the kind of people that we encountered.
Thank you. That's inspiring and hopeful. Excuse me. There is a question, Bishop Seitz, already. Someone asked, what is the status now of Annunciation House? Perhaps if you could just answer that, and then we'll continue with some other questions. I know everyone's interested.
Sure. Of course, I'm not a lawyer, but I'll tell you what I understand at this point. The Attorney General of the state of Texas has, as you've, I imagine, heard, acted to make tremendously shocking accusations against Annunciation House, accusations that we believe have no bearing in fact at all. They're fabrications and exaggerations, saying that an organization that has been dedicated for more than 45 years to removing people from the risk of human trafficking is in fact trafficking. It's quite the opposite. They were founded by a man who had worked for the Diocese of El Paso as a youth minister. And not long after having met Mother Teresa, who visited El Paso, dedicated his life to this particular ministry. He wanted to serve the poorest of the poor in our region. During the vast majority of that time, in fact, only in the last couple of years has he even accepted any money from the government. He was just living on faith that God would provide for what he needed. It was founded not as a part of the Diocese of El Paso, but an organization, an NGO that was deeply rooted in the Catholic faith and is. So there have been a number of days, encounters in court up to this point. The first judge was very strong, in saying that this seemed like more a political move than anything else. And then it was the case was moved up to an appeals court, and I believe we're still waiting for some decisions in the case about first of all, just what documents have to be turned over. The appeal of the Attorney General was to receive just a blank check, if you will, and all of the documents, which included private medical information and so on. And so we're waiting for the judge to say just what has to be turned over. And meanwhile, Annunciation House continues to serve.
Thank you. Thank you, Bishop. We have all been listening to a narrative about immigrants that is upsetting and I believe very inaccurate. How can we best change that narrative? For example, I believe that immigrants often make a tremendous contribution to our local communities. Maybe could you say a little bit about once migrants arrive in the United States, what kinds of contributions are they making to our communities? And what would you say about the dehumanizing description of them that is unfortunately too common in the political rhetoric of these days? What do they bring to the United States, to our own communities? How do you see that in El Paso and in Texas?
Well, I think it's important to see the reality of the presence of immigrants as part of the story of the United States in a way that you couldn't say that hardly of any other nation, at least not any nation outside of the New World. But the United States has been founded by immigrants, and in many ways, I think you could trace the successes of our country in terms of its vitality, in terms of its economy, in terms of its form of government, and so on, upon the contributions of immigrants. The sad reality is that we've had a forgetfulness of that truth in our recent past. And I suppose if you go back into the history and look carefully, you see that this forgetfulness is something that has that we've suffered from through the years. Because while on the one hand, many times our country has acknowledged this reality and what we owe to immigrants, on the other hand, very often the ones who came earlier have reacted negatively towards the ones who are arriving more recently. The immigrants, the tremendous flows of the Germans, the Polish, the Irish, the Italians, who came in tremendous numbers, millions of them in the 1800s and early 1900s. They all faced tremendous prejudice as they sought to come in, and people thought that they were somehow less smart, less able, less moral, and so on. So sadly, we're slow to learn. But if you step back and look at the reality, what you see is that immigrants bring a vitality to the country. They are the kind of people who don't expect things to be handed to them. They expect to work hard, and they give their lives for their family and for their children. Studies that have been done by the federal government, in fact, very objective studies. I'm sorry, the name of the government organization that looks into the economic future said that immigrants are a positive to our economy and to our tax base, especially now, in a way that it never has before, because we're not having children. For our country to be healthy, we need new young people, young workers. We can't be a nation of retired people, right? And so we depend on those who are coming, who are willing to do the hard work at the bottom of the pay scale, harvesting our crops, preparing our meat, milking our cows, working in our service industry, working in our hospitals, in the so-called unskilled aspects of it that are so essential. So, and then having kids that still have a hunger to study hard and to advance themselves economically. And at the same time, I'd be remiss if I didn't say that their presence also brings a vitality to the faith because of the experience that they've had of God's power in their lives. That translates into a tremendous new energy in terms of the communities that come together and live the faith and strengthen our own communities. It would be hard to overestimate just how important immigrants are to us. Recently, studies have shown that there are 8 to 9 million job openings in our country. What happens if those jobs aren't filled? Is it good for the economy or is it bad for the economy? I think the answer to that question is pretty clear. We see the help wanted signs on our doors. We need immigrants. And right now in this unstable world, they need refuge.
Thank you, Bishop Seitz. It's a very different picture than we often hear in the news about immigrants and migrants. Another participant asked, what would you say are the changes that need to be made at the border, or at least at the border in El Paso and Juarez, and how can we go about making those? What would you see as a positive way forward at the border, just in general?
Okay. Yes. Well, as a person of the church, my role is not to form legislation, but rather to put forth principles. And so while we might well weigh in on different proposals based on those principles, it is the task of legislators and other experts to bring together the legislation. But there's still, having said that, there's a lot that we can say. And it begins with the fact that the church teaches that there ought to be, that we accept the reality of borders in nation states. We believe that a country has a right to protect its borders in a certain way and to navigate who comes and who goes across borders. There should be an orderly system by which people can pass. We shouldn't have a system that is so unresponsive to the economic realities as well as the tremendous necessity of those who flee to our border. We need to have a system that allows those who have a case for entering our country to be able to pass. That's not the case right now. As I mentioned, we have tremendous economic needs, but we also live in a world in which people's lives are so devalued that they and their children live under tremendous threat of their life. We have not, as a country, risen to respond to that need. We have shown a lack of concern, a hardness of heart. We speak about having somehow done all we can do, and yet show me how it's impacted our lives in a negative way. If we had an orderly system, then people that we didn't want to come in we would know who they were if they attempted to sneak across, because those who were applying and had the opportunity to make their case would be doing exactly that. So even the safety of our country and those who live here would be better protected by a system that responded to the needs of people. If I might add something to that, what's often overlooked, I think, in our response to these poorest of the poor who come to our borders is that if we consider ourselves Christian, then we realize that when we serve them, we are depending upon the help of God. That sounds almost like a trope or something, but we really, as Christians, we ought to believe that God cares for those who are in greatest need, and he will use us as instruments. We keep on evaluating this as though God wasn't even part of the equation, as if it was going to depend just on what we can pull out of our own brain or our own wallet. But the fact is that when we cooperate with God, then the same God who was able to take 5 loaves and 2 fish to feed thousands, you think that same God can't help us to find resources we didn't think we had in the service of others? I certainly believe it, and I think everyone who calls themselves a Christian needs to put their greater trust in God to help us respond to the needs at our door.
Thank you, Bishop Seitz. As you said, or I know that the U.S. bishops together, the bishops, the Catholic Conference and the U.S. bishops have spoken out strongly on immigration. But within the conference, do you see some more progressive and some more conservative approaches to immigration? I know there are on many issues differences among, within the church and among the bishops, but on immigration, do you see significant differences among the bishops or not so much?
Well, let me begin by saying that, first of all, bishops, just like all the rest of us in the church, are each different personalities, right? And we live in different situations according to the particular dioceses where we serve. But I think I can assure you, based on several years' experience now, that the other bishops that I've met in the United States, and I've met most of them, are all Catholic. I think so.
That's good to hear.
Yeah, they're Catholic. And saying that, I've seen in bishops that might be placed in various locations along the spectrum of conservative to progressive, whatever, however you want to divide it, a real concern for the immigrants that we're encountering, and a real support for the work that my committee is doing for the Conference of Bishops, and that I've been involved with at the border. We have a tremendous belief in the dignity of every human life. Now, having said that, not everyone has had the opportunity that I've had to see that daily reality at the border. And I often invite them to come see it for themselves. And that would be a good invitation to anyone who wants to really understand this issue. Don't just go on media reports. Don't just go on one incident that is repeated over and over and over again on television, to the point where people unconsciously think that it speaks to the whole reality. So very often one of my tasks is to inform my brother bishops about what I'm seeing, what we're working on, and what the reality is, for instance, in the sending countries. So, and I'm not alone. There are many bishops that are involved in this process and have become very informed. Practically at every meeting of the U.S. bishops, I'm allowed to report and update my brothers on what's happening at the border and in general in immigration.
Well, thank you, and of course you're doing the same for us today, and it's very helpful. There's a message for you from Nate Bacon in Guatemala. He said, Bishop Seitz, greetings from Guatemala. So grateful for your leadership in standing with our sisters and brothers across the borders, defending human dignity and keeping with our faith. I wonder if you might say a few words about the Faith-Based Root Causes Coalition and how we can all be better engaged in changing the wind in Washington on migration issues, both in the light of the current administration as well as post-election. Anything that you could share with us about the Root Causes Coalition and how you would see us contributing to a change in the tone about immigration in our country?
I suppose many of our listeners might be surprised to know how much initiative there is going on, very positive initiatives in our hemisphere. Faith in Action and Fe en Acción, the Root Causes Initiative is an organization that brings together different grassroots organizations in order to come together and share insights and efforts and so on. And I think that it's been a very significant collaborative effort, very, very important that we not operate just as little islands unto ourselves. Our Holy Father has been so strong in calling us to collaborate across borders. And he reminds us that while nations may have borders, the church doesn't, and so that we need to be willing to collaborate with one another, and we can do so much more when we do. There have been regular meetings of this organization, and it was really helpful in the days when the Biden-Harris administration was preparing for the inauguration, to make sure that they were aware of how we could really have an impact on root causes. Because as I've often tried to point out, at the border, you won't find the causes of immigration problems. You'll see the symptoms of bad policy. But if you really want to get to the causes, then you have to go to the sending countries. And the United States cannot absolve ourselves of responsibility for assisting in those countries. Why? Well, first of all, because we're part of this broader world, but also because, unfortunately, we are part of the problem. We're some of the reasons for the instability in these countries, both in terms of the way we've meddled in their internal affairs over the course of many decades. I'm thinking especially about Central America, but also because of our insatiable hunger for drugs, which is what provides the unlimited cash to criminal organizations, multinational organizations that are able to purchase more advanced weapons even than the governments of countries where they live. We have done that. Our country has done that. Not only do we provide the money, but we also send them the arms. So we can't escape responsibility, and we need to do a lot more than that. Instead of spending billions and billions on a border that desperate people will continue to find ways to traverse, we need to help these countries to address the inequalities, the insecurity, the daily problems from climate change and so on, so that they can exercise the first right, if you will, when it comes to the right of migrants, and that is the right to stay in your own home, which is what practically everyone would do if they had the chance.
So important. Recently, Bishop Seitz, we had the privilege of hosting a conversation among a number of immigrants, migrants, people who work with migrants, church leadership across the Americas. It was about a year ago. And I was very struck by the fact that nonviolence is not often associated with migration and immigration. More often, we hear about the violence, the tremendous violence that faces people when they leave their countries, the violence that many migrants encounter almost every step of the way on their journey. Or we're tragically told that migrants themselves are a threat to communities where they settle or where they pass through, and you yourself said that's not the reality at all. Pax Christi International has come to believe that migration itself is a form of nonviolent resistance to those violences that are part of people's lives at home, and that on the way, there are a myriad of examples of nonviolent ways that people assist and accompany and act in solidarity with migrants, often migrants themselves, who help each other through sometimes very dangerous times. I wonder if that makes sense to you. Could you say a little bit about how you have experienced the presence of nonviolence among migrants and in migrant communities, and what that teaches all of us?
Thank you. I think you make an excellent point that immigrants are themselves showing a pathway of nonviolent resistance. They certainly could be justified on a certain level for fighting what they face, even though the odds of them being able to overcome the powers that they're up against are practically nil. But they're peaceful people. And, I think a lot of people in their circumstances, very often being marginalized and, mistreated in so many ways, judged. A lot of times people might react in a very understandable anger to that mistreatment, even by governments. But we don't see them taking up arms or anything like that. We see them just trying to carry on their life the best that they can in very difficult circumstances. And so I think you make a very good point, but if I might point out, I think there's another way in which the reality of immigration can be and is a pathway to peace and nonviolence. And that is because the presence of immigrants in a country is a way that people can come to know one another across the various lines that very often divide us. Their very presence in the midst of our country, if we only take the opportunity to know them, breaks down our unconscious prejudices about people of color, people who speak another language, people who haven't had the opportunity for the education we've received, people of a different culture. And in fact, we come to see them not as other, not as strangers, but as our other selves. We see ourselves mirrored in their face and their struggle, and we see our better selves sometimes in their courage and strength in the midst of trials. They make us better, and especially when they become not they, but us. They unite our world in a certain way when they are present in our midst. So I've really reflected on this lately. I had a chance to speak at a conference on peacemaking in Paris last month. It drew 3,000 people of all different religions from around the world, sponsored by the San Egidio community. And I tried to address this truth. And it was a wonderful opportunity for me to just reflect a little further on this profound way in which God is giving us, I think, the opportunity in the midst, how he can take terrible things, bad things, and bring good. That's God's special power. And I think maybe he's doing that in the midst of this broken world of ours. Maybe we have the opportunity not to stay in isolation from one another because of the presence of immigration.
That's a very beautiful thought. That is a very lovely and hopeful. It also leads me to another comment, a question in the chat. Denise Burgess said she was recently with a marynal immersion visit to El Paso earlier this month, and that it was a real life-changing experience. She was very impressed that you joined the group and the migrants during the dinner at Annunciation House, and appreciated that very much. And I wanted to ask you a question that highlights for me. If you could say a little bit about the community at the border in El Paso and along the border that gathers to both welcome immigrants and refugees and to learn from migrants and refugees. And just could you describe a little bit about that that wonderful community that's present in your community.
I feel so blessed to be here. You know, I didn't grow up in the South or Southwest. I grew up in Wisconsin. And as I look back on my life, I see how God has taken charge and lifted me up by the hair when I had hair, to go places where I didn't expect, attracted to university and a seminary in Dallas, eventually joining the Diocese of Dallas, and then on a day that was so life-changing and shocking to me, informed that I had been named as an auxiliary bishop in Dallas. And then 3 years later, to the day, being informed that I was named the Bishop of El Paso. At that time, I said, okay, but I've never been to El Paso. It's 640 miles south and west from Dallas. And so it was quite a surprise, and I didn't really know what to expect. Something I learned when I came to El Paso very quickly is that it's so well named, El Paso, because from time immemorial, it has been a place of passage. It is a pass between mountain ranges on a river that is a place, has been a place of commerce and passing in the middle of the desert. It's a place where those who live here understand the dynamism of a border. And we don't understand it the same way the average person who lives away from a border understands it. For us, the border is not a place of conflict, a place where two opposing armies stand off against one another, as if it's the so-called demilitarized zone, which is, of course, anything but that. It is a place of encounter. It is a place of a dynamic meeting of two cultures, two nations, two peoples, that in a certain sense, in the midst of that meeting, become a new reality, a binational kind of community. It struck me early on that El Paso, in some ways, could be a model for the rest of the world. It can show a different possibility. And I think our Holy Father has seen that also. He came to the border at Ciudad Juarez in 2016, and he often refers to his experience there. He loved the way that we celebrated his coming as one people across the border. So that's the kind of place we are. When you meet people in El Paso who have lived here for some time, you'll practically always find that they have family across the border in Ciudad Juarez or in the capital city of Chihuahua. You'll find that people who live in Ciudad Juarez have likewise relatives, and they send their kids to school on our side, and we have our kids go to school on their side. We are bilingual by and large. We shop on one side and work on the other, and so on. So it's fascinating, the dynamism of this place. And when it comes to immigration, we say, of course we welcome people. That's what we do. That's who we are. That's our identity. It is in a certain way our culture. And while certainly there are people who don't fully get it, don't buy in, the vast majority of people are tremendously welcoming here. And I feel so blessed to be here. I love to have people come and know a little bit about this special place.
You've conveyed that very beautifully, Bishop Seitz. There are a few questions about the numbers of people now coming to the entry points, or the numbers of people who were being, for example, bused to other parts of the country. Are you noticing a big difference, a change, an increase, a decrease? What's the status now?
Our numbers are way down.
Mm-hmm.
We've closed 3 of our 5 shelters, which our church shelters are not permanent ones. They're parish facilities by and large, and then our own pastoral center facility that we turned over to the use of immigrants who need refuge just for a couple of days as they pass through to wherever they have family or sponsors and the like. So we've closed some because unfortunately the Biden administration has adopted some policies that had originally been proposed by President Trump's administration. And we believe that they are violating, actually, the asylum law, which says that we must give an opportunity to those who arrive at our border to claim asylum, to make their case for asylum. Now, they're trying to implement a policy that would prevent a person from crossing between ports, and that would allow them to limit the flow, the numbers that they accept, drastically. So our numbers are down from 800 to 1,000 a day here in El Paso to less than 200 a day, which for us is not any difficulty at all. Even 800 or 1,000, we've managed to do even with the limited resources here, and we were happy to do for the sake of people who have fled to our border in great desperation. So we're very concerned, because when they aren't crossing, then what happens to them? When they leave their home country, they're generally leaving because they have to, because if they stay, they will die. Mm-hmm. When they prepare to leave, they sell everything they can, and very often they incur tremendous debt. Yeah. They can't go back, and they can't stay where they are, especially once they've arrived at northern Mexico, which is a very, unfortunately, unstable, insecure place. Mm-hmm. With organized crime gangs that have found ways to make a lot of money off of them. There's a high level of kidnapping, a very high percentage. I can't tell you an exact number, but it is common to hear that people were kidnapped, that the kidnappers force them to contact family, often in the United States, and pay ransom and so on. So I'm very concerned about the lives and the well-being of these very often families who have nowhere else to turn. In our country, sad to say, when they hear the numbers are down, they say, "Oh, thank God, they're not burdening us anymore." Would that there were more people who can say, my heart breaks for them. Mm-hmm. I'm worried about their well-being because they are brothers and sisters to me.
Thank you, Bishop Seitz. That we're almost out of time, but maybe just one more question. Several have asked, what more can we do? What more could the church be doing to help us understand this reality? How can we who may live in another part of the country, may not be interacting with immigrants on a regular basis, what could we be doing that would contribute to a dignified life for so many people who come to this country seeking help or asylum or a safe place to live?
As chair of the Committee on Migration and Refugee Services, one of my responsibilities is to advocate for immigrants, for people on the move. And I've certainly attempted to do that, and I will continue with legislators, with people from the State Department and the administration, and no matter which administration is in power. We need to do that as a church. We need to be the conscience of our leaders. But something that's come home clearly to me is that that advocacy will not have an impact unless we change the minds and hearts of citizens, of members of this country who vote. We just have to do the hard work of reaching to the grassroots in our country and help people to understand in a way, an understanding that can only come from encounter. And that can happen. You know, not everybody is going to be able to even go to the border, or not much less sending countries. But fortunately, the border has come to us in a certain way, right? Because wherever we live, there are immigrants. And I just wish and I hope and pray that people will take the opportunity where they live to reach out, to meet these people, ask them your questions. But don't threaten them. Just, let them know that you are interested in their story. And their story will very likely change your life, because you'll begin to see a reality through their eyes that you were unable to see before. On our committee, we're inaugurating an education plan that we hope will allow this to happen in a more organized way. And we're working with JFI, Justice for Immigrants campaign. We're trying to have a liaison in every diocese that will help to communicate with the various parishes of the diocese. And we hope in that way, we will impact this reality. Hopefully we'll make some ground after we're done voting.
Thank you so much, Bishop Seitz. You have given us much reason to hope, and you have shared such a beautiful story about those who are arriving in our own country. It's now my pleasure to introduce Martinez Romero, who is the Secretary General of Pax Christi International. Welcome, Martinez, from Colombia.
Thank you very much, dear Mary, for so beautiful guiding our conversation today. And a heartfelt thank you to Bishop Mark Seitz for sharing your experience. You reminded us of the profound humanity at the heart of immigration, and I was truly inspired. The world needs more compassionate pastors like you. This conversation resonated deeply with me as someone who comes from and lives in Colombia, where migration, displacement, forced refugee, and the path for the Darian region in the jungle between Panama and Colombia, you talked about that, is not just a topic, but a lived reality for many. I've witnessed firsthand the struggles and dreams of those embarking on the journey to seek a better life. Their stories of courage and resilience inspire me every day, reminding us that migration is not merely a statistics or a political debate. It is a profoundly human experience that demands our empathy and action. In our pursuit of peace, we cannot leave anyone behind. At Pax Christi, we believe that the fight for justice includes the struggle for dignity for every person, no matter where they come from. Our mission compels us to stand in solidarity with those who are often marginalized and voiceless. As you reflect on today's discussion, I invite you to engage more deeply with our mission. Your support is vital to our ongoing efforts to promote justice and peace for everyone. Each contribution allows us to amplify the voices of those who often go unheard, to educate others about these realities, and to support initiatives that uplift and empower vulnerable communities. Before we close, I'd like to share a special video featuring a longtime friend and supporter of Pax Christi. Her generosity has made a significant impact on our work and the communities we serve, and we hope her story will inspire you to contribute today and help sustain our vital work. Gracias, muchas gracias.
Hello, friends of peace. My name is Anne, and I live in Northern Virginia, not far from the Pentagon and the CIA. After marching, demonstrating, and rallying for many decades, I now use my resources to support organizations whose work is to effect systemic change in institutions of power. My prayer is that such changes will set humanity on a course of cooperation and collaboration to solve the pernicious issues that impede the peace and justice that our loving God seeks for us. I trust my support for Pax Christi International will inspire young people like my daughters and granddaughters to take up the mantle of peacemaking and working for justice for all. Being older, it is easy to donate to charity through my IRA account. Pax Christi International's Education Fund is a tax-qualified organization that I am blessed to be able to support because everything it does aligns with my conscience and how Jesus calls me to act.
Once again, a great big thank you to Bishop Seitz. Thank you for being with us. Thank you, Martinez. Thank you to Anne Murphy for her lovely tribute. And thank you all for joining us.
God bless you all. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. And we continue.
Bye.
Bye.